Hello, my name is Michael Lambert, and today I want to start with a quotation, which is this. The door remains open for Britain to rejoin the European Union at any time. Now, I think most people would think anyone who said that was barking. But the person who said it, and it was said last week, was none other than Michel Barnier, the Chief Negotiator for the EU. Now, he's a very, very, very senior person in the EU, and I'm quite sure he wouldn't have made such a statement without it being agreed or approved of by the powers that be in the EU. And so it does appear that, as far as the EU is concerned, we could go back. Obviously, it would be difficult, it would be complicated, and it wouldn't be on anything like the favourable terms we had before. But it is very interesting, I think, at a time when public opinion is turning so quickly against Brexit, and when the majority feel it was a mistake, and when more and more people are beginning to suffer as a result of it, and when we can see, that we can no longer go on blaming the pandemic, or blaming Putin, or blaming the alignment of the stars for everything that's gone wrong and is going wrong and is likely to go on going wrong. It is very clearly Brexit is having a huge detrimental effect on our economy and will continue to do so. In fact, as far as I can see, it's just going to get worse and worse and worse. And I think a big turning point will come when property prices start to reduce significantly later this year. So I thought we could be in a situation where there's a general election this year, next year, and after the election the Tories come back in, and the Tories, having learnt their lesson from Brexit, are likely to be a lot less extreme. A lot of the extremists on the backbenchers, apart from that they're all quite old, about due to retire, but a lot of them are going to be replaced by people a bit more moderate, and the whole policy, the whole attitude of the new Conservative government could be much more moderate towards Europe. At the same time, the Liberal Democrats, they're going to see what's going on, and they're going to be definitely anti-Brexit, pro-return, and of course the SNP are very strongly pro-return. And so you could end up with the government, Keir Starmer and his front bench, being the only people in the country who are going to be absolutely determined that we will never, ever return to the EU or the single market or the custom union. And I just thought again, I've said it before and I repeat it, the stupidity of Starmer coming out right at the beginning, what was it, a year or more ago, and saying we'll never go back, not knowing how circumstances would change, not knowing that the whole public opinion would almost certainly change as time went by, to have painted himself into such a corner. And you hear it all the time, the front benchers all coming out, they're all saying, no, we're never ever going back, that story's all over, that's done with, now it's a question of making a success of it. Nobody will ever make a success of Brexit. It's not possible. But I wanted today I wanted to look at, it was such a dramatic thing voting to leave the EU, and it's had such devastating consequences. And I wanted to look at the people who actually voted for Brexit and try and get some sort of idea of what sort of people favoured Brexit and brought it about, because after all, it supplies everybody that we voted to leave. And I've thought about this a good deal, and I think there were two groups, you can say, of people who voted to leave the EU. One was people who are getting on a bit, quite old, who probably paid off the mortgage and are reasonably comfortably off, and the children have all grown up and they haven't had to worry about borrowing tuition fees. They've managed to find that money themselves, and they're all quite comfortable. It's that that thing that so many people have, that I'm all right. It's very much like Braverman and Patel. They came here as children of immigrants and they're fine, but they don't want anybody else to have the same benefit. It's like these old people, these getting older people. They've got all they want, and they really don't want other people. They don't want foreigners coming in and sharing it. These are the people I'm talking about, the Daily Telegraph, the Daily Mail readers who look down on everybody really, unless they're richer or posher than they are. And I think they were quite a powerful force. It's obviously a diminishing force because a lot of them are dying off, and a few years' time they'll all be gone. But nonetheless, they were not thinking about the future because they haven't got much future anyway, and they're not particularly concerned about any freedom of movement. They're not going anywhere. They're settled down now and so on. And so very, very selfishly, this whole group voted. And you look at the backbenchers of the Tory party, and it's just absolutely full of those sort of people. They all voted to leave. And I think a lot of them were thinking about the glory days and thinking about how wonderful our country was, before we ever got involved in all these European ventures and so on. And I think on the other end, you've got this huge mass, maybe half of the population, who really haven't had the benefit of a very, very good education. People who are, generally speaking, not very interested in politics, if at all. And during the referendum, if you ever said to somebody didn't know what they were voting for, you were told, oh, how dare you say such a thing? They knew exactly what they were voting for. Are you calling them stupid? Well, of course, as far as politics is concerned, most people are stupid. Most of these sort of people I'm talking about are stupid. They're not interested. And it's not really a criticism to say somebody doesn't know anything about something they're not interested in. I personally know nothing about butterflies in Patagonia. That doesn't make me stupid. But don't ask me to vote about butterflies in Patagonia because I don't know. And so there's this whole mass of people who were so easy to persuade with slogans, with taking back control. It's so easy to be persuaded, especially when there are people who read the Sun and they read the Express, the worst paper of all, and the Mirror and so on, and they read all these headlines telling them about how the country's full up and how immigrants are coming here and using the NHS, and how some of them are murderers and rapists, and how we're being controlled and dictated to by civil servants in Brussels. It was a very easy, slightly ignorant cohort, a huge mass of the population who were very easy to persuade. And whilst an awful lot of them wouldn't have bothered to vote because they weren't interested, enough of them were persuaded by the likes of Farage and Johnson and so on that we should all get out, and that we'd be so much better off, and that everything would be cheaper, and we'd do all these. They were interested in trade deals all over the world. They just were told that we'd be a lot better off if we left, and I think in both cases, both these two groups, it's a question of what I think is known as British exceptionalism. I think it's not British at all, it's English exceptionalism. You seldom find this amongst Scots and Welsh and Northern Irish. You find it very much amongst English people, this idea that we're just a little bit better than these foreigners. I sometimes wonder how when some of these people who have that attitude, when they travel and they go to all these wonderful countries in Europe and they see the wonderful things that are going on, and how good the standard of living is so often. I just wonder how they reconcile that with the idea that we're so much better than all these people. These people, after all, we save them. Either we beat them or we saved them in the war, didn't we? And we won the World Cup in 1966. So how come they have the audacity to think we're equal? And it was always a bit of humiliation, I think, for a lot of these people, who thought that we had to sit down on equal terms with all these other member countries of the EU. So I think it was very much a question of ignorance and this sense of exceptionalism that persuaded these two cohorts to vote to leave the EU. And I think it's a huge lesson that we should never, ever have a referendum for a complicated issue such as Brexit. And not only that, the idea of it being a single majority that was all that's required was really extremely irresponsible. And I think Cameron should be held responsible for that for forever. Should never be allowed to forget that was just so irresponsible for such a massive decision, which is, as we know, is affecting us all so much, and most of us extremely badly. To have had that on a simple majority was just crazy. But I just did want to. I was thinking about these two groups of voters. And I just wanted to tell you a couple of little anecdotes, the experiences that I had, which I think illustrates exactly what I'm saying about the attitudes and so on of these sort of people. Now, I've travelled a great deal, particularly in France and Italy and, all over the world, really. But particularly in France, I used to have a business which involved me going to Paris for 2 or 3 days every month for, well, I think, 10 to 15 years. So I'd got to know it quite well, and I'd eaten in all sorts of restaurants. And as you would do, you get one or two favourites. And I had one particular restaurant which I liked very much indeed. I used to go there very often, and I got to know the man and his wife who owned it, and so on. And it was in central Paris, but it was a little bistro. It was very sort of cosy, and it was it was nice, warm, and really welcoming sort of place. And I used to go there at the end of a day. I'd been rushing around on the metro and all this and seeing people, and it was a great place to go and just sort of wind down, have some wine, some food, and spend a quiet evening. It was a restaurant. It was off the beaten track, so you never got any tourists there. It was always locals who were there, and it was usually about half full or so on. Now I was in there one evening, and I was enjoying whatever it was I was having, and the door opened, and in walked four people, 2 men, 2 women. They were all, I would say, in their 50s, but they were very, very, very obviously English people. And there's something about some tourists, or some people, when they go abroad, it's slightly awkward, and they kind of stick out. The men wear it's almost like a uniform. They wear nicely cut sports jackets and check shirts, and for some reason or other they have a penchant for corduroy trousers in bright colours, in pink and orange and yellow and red and that sort of. And they wear shiny brogues. And the ladies all wear frocks, and they have cardigans over the shoulder and so on, and they wear flat shoes. They wouldn't wear anything relaxing or something, because that would be that's what ordinary people do. And so I saw these 4 people come in. They're looking awfully nervous and awfully anxious. I think the anxiety is about would they have to say something in French? But what if they didn't understand what they were saying? Because only one of them would have done French a long time ago at school, and they didn't really like. English people don't like pronouncing foreign languages, and if they really do have to, they hate to use the accent or try to use the accent. It's so embarrassing. So anyway, they came in, and they were greatly relieved to see that the waitress, who was in fact a Bulgarian, she was a medical student doing a year off in Paris. Anyway, she spoke perfect English and she spoke perfect French, and she obviously spoke Bulgarian. She's already trilingual, the waitress. Anyway, she showed them down to the table, and the menus arrived and so on, and they sort of sheepishly looked at them, and eventually the waitress took the order and so on, and then the wine arrived, and then the food started to arrive, and I watched these people for the next hour and a half. And as time went by, the conversation, which was almost whispered when they came in, got louder and louder and louder and louder, until the whole restaurant was reverberating with these women squawking like seagulls, the men guffawing like horses, oohing and eyeing and laughing and shouting and all the rest of it, behaving just so badly, really. And come the end of it, everybody in the restaurant, and everyone was disturbed. Everyone in the restaurant, I think people out in the street knew that Fiona wanted a pony, and that Jonathan was hoping to get into Oxford, and that Charles was having frightful trouble with the Volvo. Nobody cared, but they didn't care that nobody cared, and they didn't care that it was disturbing any. And I thought this was very much this sort of people. They felt, as soon as they got a bit of wine inside them, or as soon as they got home, they'd feel superior to foreigners. But yet, in fact, when they're on level terms, when they're so timid and so anxious and so unsure, just generally confused, I think. But to illustrate the other end, the much bigger group who voted to take back control because of, or to take back control and to stop foreigners coming and so on. I used to sometimes, when I was in Paris, I'd walk around after I'd eaten for an hour or so, because it's very pleasant to walk around and look around. And once in a while, I pop into a bar. On one particular evening, I popped into a bar, and it was quite a long, narrow bar. It was about half full. At the end of the bar, it opened up into a bigger area, a wider area, where there was a pool table, and there were 4 boys playing pool. And I realised immediately they were English, and they seemed perfectly nice lads. They were not making any noise. They weren't swearing. They weren't disturbing anybody. They were just having a nice game of pool. It was fine. And at one stage, one of them came over to where I was standing in order to order some drinks from the bar. And as he approached me, he said, "Hello, mate." And I did something then that I've never done before. I've never done since, and I don't know why I did it. It was totally on the spur of the moment, and I will never know why I did it, but I decided to be German. So I said, hello, and he heard that I had an accent, and so he said, where are you from then, mate? So I said, I'm from Stuttgart in Germany. His face froze. He said, wait, mate, wait, don't go anywhere. Dash back to the pool table. Dave, Terry, Reg, come over here, quickly. And they all came over and they all stood in front of me. 4 mid-20s English lads. And he looked at them and he gave them a wink. And he looked at me and he said, in 1966, in the World Cup, and I thought, these guys have spent 10 or 12 years in education. They hear Germany, and all they know is that England beat them in a football match 30 years before they were born. And I thought that was it. He wanted them all to feel superior. This is a German guy, we beat them. And I think if I'd stayed there, I didn't stay, but I think if I'd stayed, they'd been telling me about how they won the war as well. And I think there again, it's very sad that our standards of education are so poor that's the way people react. Just to the name Germany, it just seemed extraordinary, but very sad. And I think to have asked someone like that, because they were probably too young to vote in the referendum, but had they been not been too young, they'd have all voted to leave. I'm quite sure of it, because they'd have all felt better than foreigners because we beat the World Cup. And I think the lesson after all this is over, which will only be over when we rejoin the EU. When it's all over, will be the lesson will be you should never ever have a referendum for something as complicated as Brexit, or even 1% as complicated as Brexit. I mean, the whole point of having an elected parliament is that the parliamentarians, the MPs, are the experts, and they know the information and they know how to make decisions. You don't go around asking somebody who thinks we're better than the EU because we won the World Cup in 1966. So anyway, there's just a few thoughts I'd had about it for what it's worth. If you watch this well, thank you very much indeed. If you haven't subscribed and you wouldn't mind doing so, if you approve of what I say, I'd appreciate it. And so on. Until next time, bye for now.